Did Rolex make the first automatic watch? Did they actually invent the self-winding movement?
The first wristwatch with an automatic movement, it's gotta be Rolex.
This is what most people believe. But there are some people who think they know more, so they believe into this.
So I said Rolex made the first automatic winding movement, and a few users actually called me out and said that's not technically correct. John Harwood with Fortis AD did the first automatic winding watch before Rolex. This was confirmed by Rolex in 1956 with an apology to Harwood.
We're gonna talk about Harwood and that apology. That's actually much more interesting story than you think you know.
So yes, Rolex did not have the first automatic winding watch, there were others, but they did have the first perpetual rotor.
And again, I'm not picking on Michael here. Even on the official Rolex website, it says this. In 1931, Rolex invented and patented, both invented and patented, the world's first self-winding mechanism with the Perpetual Rot. It's actually a very confusing message. What they are trying to say here, that they actually invented self-winding mechanism, or they are trying to say that they did not invent self-winding mechanism, but they invented the improvement in self-winding mechanism, which is Perpetual Rot. I'm confused here. So they are definitely trying to confuse their customer. Even if they are trying to say that they invented a perpetual rotor, did they really invent what they call a perpetual rotor? Did they actually invent anything in 1931? Was it something? Or maybe it was nothing that they invented in 1931? you will see everything in this video, but let me do this like spoiler alert. So if after 1931, let's say in 1932, Rolex would decide to make their own in-house movements with what they call a perpetual rotor, you know what? They wouldn't be allowed to do that. They can do it because they don't have a patent. So keep watching. Let's start with the first automatic watch. Unfortunately, my friend Nelson wasn't able to join me in this video, but you will see a lot of Nelson. You actually will hear a lot of Nelson in this video anyway. So let's start from the watch that Nelson actually owns. So that's a beautiful Harwood watch. And if you take a look at the movement of this watch, then that's obviously an automatic movement, right? John Harwood started making these watches in 1926. And since you've heard from Rolex that they invented something in 1931, then obviously Nelson's watch was made before Rolex claims they invented something, maybe for self-winding watch, right? So it's obvious that Rolex did not invent self-winding watch because, like, look at the Nelson's watch, right? That's obviously an automatic watch. And Rolex, even while Rolex claimed that they invented first self-winding watch, they even issued an apology in 1956. And this is very weird apology. Like, who apologizes like that? Like read this. Mr. John Harwood of blah blah was the inventor of the first self-winding wristwatch. So okay, so they claim that John Harwood was inventor of the first self-winding watch and not them. This is good. This is good. But hear this. And we apologize for any injury to his feelings. They apologize that they hurt John Harwood's feelings. Who apologizes like that? It doesn't matter that they deceived their customers for many years and they still keep doing that. They just apologize for one little thing, that they hurt Mr. John Harwood's feelings. And also they say that, oh, we did not deceive our customers or anybody, we just omitted the word rotor in our advertising from 1955. This is terrible. This is like, who does this? Anyway, the story of the first self-winding watch is actually a little bit more interesting, even with comparing to what Rolex claims in their apology line. So let's hear from my friend Nelson.
For the full history, let's not forget Louis Abraham Perrelet, which invented the self-winding movement in a pocket watch. That's Louis Abraham Perrelet. And there's also Léon Leroy, which is the first one that put a self-winding movement in a wristwatch. The first actual self-winding wristwatch that Leroy produced or started selling in 1922, a year prior to John Harwood applying for his patent in 1923. Now, the difference is that some people defend John Harwood because he's the first one to have actually applied for a patent for the self-winding watch. Leroy never did, even though they did produce one before Harwood. So apparently Leroy claims, even on their website to this day, that they kept that watch in their collection, the Marquise, for the following 10 years. Now, Harwood applied for his patent in 1923 and supposedly only produced the first self-winding watch of his collection in 1926. So it's an interesting extract from Leroy's archives, even though they never applied for a patent. That merit does go to.
Now, when we know that Rolex did not invent the self-winding movement, let's talk about the Perpetual Rot. On Rolex website, they claim that they invented and patented something called Perpetual Rot. The whole claim that Rolex made some invention or an important invention in a wristwatch movements, but you should agree with me, this actually sounds very, very weird. How can it be? How can it be that they invented something in movement when they never made movements, right? So the first time then Rolex actually technically started making in-house movements was in 2004, when they bought Aglair, right? And it's, again, they just bought the supplier, but they never made in-house movements. So how is it that they invented something in movements that they never made, right? Doesn't that sound odd to you, right? Oh, okay, so let's take a look at this Perpetual Rot, right? So let's see what happened actually in 1931, right? So what Rolex called Perpetual Rot was invented by Emile Borer. And Emile Borer is it's a big guy in a company called Aglair, and that company was so he was actually part of the Aglair family, and he was like the chief engineer. After that, he was CTO. I think he even later ran the whole company. So that company Aglair, in 1931, because we are talking about 1931, right? In 1931, they had two big customers. They had one of them was Rolex, another one was Gruen. And in addition to these two big customers, they had a lot of smaller customers. So they were making movements for a lot of many different customers, and like one big one was Rolex, but also Gruen was also very, very big. So in 1931, Emile Borer invented what Rolex calls Perpetual Rot. And Nelson was actually able to find two patents on what they call Perpetual Rot. So there was initial one, and in a few months there was small improvement to the Perpetual Rot, right? And it was invented by Emile Borer, and the patent was filed by Aglair, right? Because like Emile Borer was part of the Aglair family, he was Aglair employee. Like he did not work for Rolex, he worked for Aglair. And here we see that the patent was actually owned by Aglair. And so first it was owned by Aglair, second it was invented by Aglair, and the only way how Rolex was getting self-winding movements in their watches was because Aglair was making movements for Rolex and Gruen and other people. So now let's back to the official statement on Rolex website. So it turns out that in 1931, Rolex did not invent and did not patent the world's first self-winding mechanism. Also, in 1931, Rolex did not invent and did not patent Perpetual Rot. Now you know. So if you like vintage watches, or you want to see more of these Oyster Perpetual Lies, please subscribe to my channel. Yeah, and thank you for watching.